So our next speaker here is Barbara Hubert from Betware. Any of you ever buy a lottery ticket?
On the internet.
On the internet. And Barbara has a very interesting team. She has an agile team inside what we would call a very traditional risk-averse organization. And so it's kind of like almost observing a David and a Goliath scenario. However, in this case, Goliath is, as I think one of the best quotes I ever heard from you, is trying to import innovation.
Yes.
So I'd like to, Barbara's, I think, has been a very, I had the opportunity, where I met Barbara is actually part of my PhD research, where I was able to observe the team, and I saw a very dynamic and energetic team. And so I hope you're as eager to listen to her presentation. Project managers, scrum masters, a partnership paradigm for the self-actualized team.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just get right into it here. Basically, what I often hear in project management, and that sounds way too loud. Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Let's just do it that way then. Okay, what I often hear is the Scrum Master and the product owner replace the project manager in a project team. And my personal experience, my personal perspective is that that really just isn't so. That there's a role for a project manager, that there's a role for project management in agile teams, particularly if you're dealing with large types of projects, or you're dealing with multiple teams. If they're geographically dispersed or technically different from each other, then there's definitely a role for the project manager. So, and I'm not advocating that my way is the best way. I just want to give you some things to think about in a project Scrum Master type of a paradigm. So I think we kind of threw a lot of project management stuff out, or we have the saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We threw a lot of stuff out when we decided that project managers were not relevant in agile projects. So I'm assuming here everybody's read the bios and whatnot, and that's why I'm here. So I'd just like to do a quick overview of who's in the room. So who here is a Scrum Master and does Scrum Master stuff? Yes? Certified? Yes? Okay, and any PMs here, project managers? So you're both Scrum Master and project manager. Okay, and do you work in a product development environment, or do you work in a customer-facing environment where you're doing like projects for commissions versus
Product development.
product development?
Software as a service.
Software as a service. Okay, what about, I saw somebody way at the back there behind the laptop.
Yeah.
Yes, product development, are you doing commission type projects?
Product development.
Product development, okay. My team doesn't do product development. We do purely commissioned projects, and we work in an extremely regulated environment where the auditor comes in and they want to know for that functional requirement line 1.2.3 in the spec, what lines of code changed in our 2 million lines of code base for that change, and why did it change? So we have some pretty strong constraints there too. Okay, so basically, what is this about? What I'm hoping to do is to impart some value to you about how project management can help agile projects, and how agile projects really support some traditional project management ways of thinking and doing things, and hopefully that you'll get a little bit of value from the presentation. Okay. So I just want to kind of start off with, I've taken a definition, which I haven't put up here, about the difference between operations and projects. Because we use Agile in two different ways. We use it both operationally, and we use it for our projects. In our operations, we release into production every 2 weeks. That's the end of our iteration, release every 2 weeks. In our projects, we can't always release every 2 weeks. So I just kind of are people going to volunteer to talk to me, or am I going to have to point to people in the audience and say, talk to me? Who here wants to give me a definition of what's the difference between operations and project? In the back,
Something's happening regularly, which is the same.
right?
It's collaboration or support or ongoing changes.
Right.
And what's the project have a start and end, which might not be repeatable in the next project. The next project is different than this one. But
Right.
the operational support, everything is the same, happening all the time.
Exactly.
Regular basis.
Yes. So, and I'm taking this right from the PMI, which is the Project Management Body of Knowledge by the Project Management Institute. And this is their definition. And what we found is that, this is a little bit of a different way of thinking about it, is that by working in iterations, it's almost like we're operationalizing a bit of project development. Because we're time boxing it and we're doing the same stuff. And we're really trying to make it as predictable and repeatable as we can. And even though we're absorbing all this change, and a lot of these processes are designed to deal with change, we're really making it much more predictable in how we're managing the change as we go through. And I find that working in iterations in Agile project and in Agile development is perfect in an operational situation, because I really am releasing to production every 2 weeks. Not the same at all in projects. Lots of times it takes me 3 iterations to actually get a piece of software that's fully functioning and that I can demo. So, skip through. So, I also want to differentiate, I just want to take on my most controversial pieces of this presentation up front, because I realize that that's pretty, when I'm talking PMI and this bureaucracy, it's pretty controversial and contradictory to some of the basic Agile concepts. So I wanted to take a look at the difference between project scope and product scope. These Agile development processes are great for developing products. They're really great for developing products, but they don't necessarily take all of the project requirements and dynamics into consideration. And so I wanted to get a little bit of dialogue going about the difference between product scope and project scope. And I was hoping somebody from here want to take a stab at it. What are some of the differences between product scope and project scope?
Well, with the project, you're probably a typical one, say in IT. You would probably have to go to a steering committee, a lot of stakeholders on it. Whereas if you're building a product, you probably won't have that steering committee. You'll be building it for user something.
Yes. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. That's one thing that's certainly different. What about, you're deploying a new banking system into 25 branches across the United States. So you've got your product development group over here building their user stories and their backlog and building their product. But what are some of the other types of things that might be required by the project in a situation like that?
Training, change management.
Training, change management, yes. So when we look at product scope, we're really looking at things like minimal market features, themes, features. It's really focused on product software development, acceptance, demos, automated testing, all different types of things. But when we get into projects, it includes all of this stuff, plus a whole bunch of other stuff. And it also includes all of the things like the rules of engagement between the various teams and resource types and stakeholders within the organization or within the release. So Agile development is really, really good at the software development level, but how does it get me to getting stakeholders that are at various points on the conduit to come, and they have conflicting desires to come to an agreement? What are the tools and the things that gives me to help me do that? Okay, so see here I've got the evil project manager. and the angelic Scrum Master. So just kind of look at, so what are some of the differences? People starting to get my point here. Project management actually does have its place in Agile. It's just a different place in Scrum Master. But Scrum Master, I don't believe can replace a project manager, and I don't think that the product owner and the Scrum Master together would actually replace the project manager. And I'm hoping that this slide kind of gets us to there. So people can maybe give me some examples of what are some of the different things that a product or a Scrum Master versus a project manager might be responsible for. And I gotta tell you, I really Googled this a lot on the internet, and I had a real hard time finding anything that really made sense to my experience. Yes?
Just in my own experience, I guess sometimes the project manager is more adept at dealing with like political influences or the executives and all that kind of thing,
Yes.
taking the heat from the business, as opposed to, you know, just concentrating purely on the software process and getting the software to work, which hopefully the Scrum Master is doing.
Exactly. That's a big part of it. So when I look at this, I go, you know, the project manager may be responsible for developing the business case, which says, you know, what the ROI is going to be in the lifespan of the product itself. And he may be or she may be responsible for presenting that business case to the steering committee. They're also the overarching manager that's totally, really, they're the neck. It's not the product owner at the end of the day. It's really the project manager that is responsible, because they're the ones that are standing in front of the steering committee saying, give me this much money, give me this much time, open up these paths for me, and I'll deliver your product, your project, and all the business value that you're expecting to get at the end of the day. We're also highly responsible for stakeholder management. Things like operational readiness. Are your networking people, your people that are actually going to have to support the thing after it goes into production, are they ready for it? I hope so. But if we just focus on the user's stories and the product itself, we will miss that. So somebody has to stand outside the team and look at this kind of thing. Also, you never know, you may have very cumbersome procurement processes. It may take you 2 months or 3 months to get a purchase through the procurement process. Somebody has to be looking ahead of the team's needs and getting that kind of, addressing that kind of thing. Anyway, well, the Scrum Master to me can really be anybody on the team. I see the Scrum Master as a very technical role. They manage the backlog, they manage the user stories, they manage the initial scope. But in my world, when my team starts to get behind on the velocity, my Scrum Master digs in, he rolls his sleeves up, and he digs in, and he may do some testing. He may do some coding. He may do some other stuff. He's actually a technical resource, and she's actually a technical resource, and they're actually part of the team. We're only accountable for the software. And they support the processes, they support the product owner to make sure that the stakeholders' needs are met. But is it the product owner's job to go around and make sure that all of the stakeholders are known? Is that the product owner's job, and to manage their expectations? I don't know that it is. I think it's a fuzzy thing. In our world, it's the project managers, but I think in some worlds, the product owner can take on some of that. But it's a tough one. And they also do work at the iteration or sprint level, whereas the project manager is really looking far out. He's looking 6 months out. The Scrum Master is really looking at the release plan level. Yes?
In this board, how teams communicate with the project manager? Is it through the Scrum Master interface, or?
Yes. Yes.
So the team doesn't know about the big picture, just seeing the 1 month ahead of them, right? Which is the one
Oh, no,
sprint,
no,
right?
no, no, no.
Or
That-
when they see the impact with the rest of the team and all other stuff.
Oh, no, they would know that. They certainly would know that. Let me get into it a little bit more, and we'll get there, I promise you. But absolutely, no, they have to know. If they don't, that's part of your onboarding and your initiation process, I would assume at the very beginning. And then you also have things like scrums and all those types of things that play in. It's how you manage them. It's not intended to silo anybody. Okay, so what I want to do there, in the project management PMBOK, there are 9 areas, what they call knowledge areas. So they're not prescriptive processes. They're just knowledge areas. They're activities. It tends to be domain-like type knowledge. So you tend to be able to draw the stuff from your domain, how you do communications within this industry, how you do communications within that industry. And it has general knowledge, but they're knowledge areas. They're not specifically processes. They're knowledge areas, and they can be applied to any type of process. And so what I want to look at are 7. I don't have time to go through all of them. I'm going to try and cherry pick some of them. But really, I'm really looking at is some of the knowledge areas from the project management body of knowledge, which is, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of project managers getting together, putting their knowledge together and saying, these are the things that have worked for us. These are the knowledge areas that we felt were important to manage projects. And they can be applied to any project. They can be applied to Scrum, they can be applied to Waterfall, they can be applied to Oracle Run, EDS case method. I mean, there's a million methods out there. And so knowledge areas are things that I consider to be transferable, and that's what I think are the important things that come out of the project management body of knowledge, is the knowledge areas. And how you apply them can vary. The areas that I'm not going to discuss, and I'm going to skim over some of the others, but I'm going to run out of time here, I think, but the 2 that I'm not going to discuss are procurement and cost management. I'm just not going to go into those. I think that cost management and financial understanding at the project management level is desperately lacking in the IT industry. Present value, future value, break-even point, hurdle rates. Most project managers won't have a clue what any of that means. Most people don't know how what I'm doing right here today fits to the balance sheet, the cash flow sheet, the P&L statement. They don't know if what they're doing is an operation overhead expense or if it's a capital expense where it's an investment that's actually going to end up on a company's balance sheet. And you cannot determine product value if you don't have those types of skills. So I strongly recommend that anybody that's in managing projects and has to interact with business people, that they go and get some training in this area, because I think it's one of the most important things we can do as project managers is to really learn about finance. And procurement management is just way out of scope, so I'm just not going to cut that. So I'm just trying to go over these really quickly. And by the way, I'm taking all these right from the PMI. So I've quoted these all from the PMI. So integration management, I think, and I will spend a bit of time on this one because I think it's the most important knowledge area in the PMI. And in fact, the head project manager from Triumph out at UBC, which is one of the top nuclear physics labs in the country, told me that integration management is the make it or break it skill for a good project manager. They either have great integration management skills and their projects tend to be successful, or they don't. And it also tends to be very domain and organizational culture specific. It's who do I know in procurement when I want to go get something bought that I can just hand it over to and they'll actually get it done, or who do I know that I actually need to hang on to this piece of paper myself and make sure it gets done all the way through. It tends to have those soft skills, but it's also things like where you're bringing your time and scope management together. It's any place where you're bringing stuff together and you're integrating things, and it's how you're really pulling it all together. So I just want to, if we were looking at it, because both competencies do integration management. They just do it at different levels. Okay, so I just kind of want to get somebody. I've got you guys here. How about over here? Do you have some examples of integration management, say, for the Scrum Master level? Or no, let's do the project management level. You're probably more comfortable on that one.
Our project managers, I don't think, like, even at procurement level, they get development hardware.
Yes.
Test hardware. They remind us of the bigger picture things that we forget we have to deliver. Some of the documents.
Yes.
Plans, master test plans, architectural plans.
Okay.
Business cases that don't get written by us, they get written by other people.
Okay.
They coordinate with trainers. It's beta testing that we don't touch, so they're like the linchpin, right?
Bringing it all together. Okay. What about from the Scrum Master? Because the Scrum Master has a lot of integration responsibilities as well, yeah? Okay, so this is the way I see that they line up. They both do stakeholder management. They both have to force trade-offs. That's part of integration management, forcing trade-offs. They both. The project manager might do more resource allocation than the Scrum Master, but the Scrum Master is really the guy, we always go, oh, they're self-actualized teams and everybody picks their own work, but you know what? Ricky, he really knows reporting in that back-end interface really, really well. So I'm gonna get that user story over to him. And really, it's the Scrum Master that knows that, right? It's not the project manager, because the project manager is not that low level. We're not dealing directly. They're managing interdependencies between stories. Here's where we start to get into some differences, is that the project manager will develop a charter, project management plan, and he'll do integrated, or she'll do integrated time, scope, and cost analysis. And a charter, does anybody here know what a charter is? Please.
Well, it can depend on the organization, how they look for it, but it's basically the businesses, or the agreement between the team and the business as to what will be developed.
It's the authorization.
It's a contract.
Yeah, that says, okay, project manager, you can go now and get these resources and get
Do
these
this.
teams.
As long as you will do this,
Do the
whatever you
job.
put on paper, it's your contract to deliver.
And what about the PM plan, project manager plan? To me, now in Agile, we've often replaced release plan with project management plan, but to me, the project management plan is simply the rules of engagement. Whereas the release plan is what am I building and how am I building? And of course, both will do integrated change control, one way or the other. We embrace change as project managers and Scrum Masters and Agilists, but we have to control it. I cannot have a product owner coming in halfway through an iteration and saying, oh, and by the way, that user story about the alphanumeric on the password, it also has to be encrypted to this ISO standard for this iteration. We just can't have that because that's the increase in scope. And that would change the balance of the iteration. So just some signs that you can, if you want to see, you know, are your teams, are you actually practicing integration management? One of the things that I found is that it really helps if your entire team is involved in all of the pieces of the project management plan. Now, I'm not talking for a $30,000 project, for a $50,000 project, or even a $150,000 project necessarily. You might want to take an afternoon and go through all the points. How are we going to communicate with each other? How are we going to test? How are we going to manage our time? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? You might want to do an afternoon of that for a $150,000 project. But for a $5 million project, this kind of stuff actually really does deserve some upfront thought. Your customer's investing a lot of money in you, and so you really need to actually do some upfront due diligence. And the other thing is, we use user stories for all of our units of scope. We don't just use it for, you know, as a player, I can select a quick ticket. As a player, I can receive a free play. I can win a free play. We don't just use it for that. We say, as a developer, I know what new architectural standards are being introduced to SOAP architecture on this piece of the system. Or as a systems operator, I know what updates have been made to the central deployment tool so that I can deploy that thing. We actually use it for all of our units of scope. And when we're talking system, we actually say, oh, as the database, I might do this. Or, you know, as the web server, I might do that. So we actually, we've stolen from RAP, and everybody's an actor for all users. Okay. And the other big thing is, really enforce this change control and teach your team what it means, the value of it, and how it really works. Something that happened to us, when we were for Automax, we found that we were doing so well on our iterations that we actually banked all of the slack and contingency that we had built into the project, and we were 400 hours ahead of schedule. And business owner came to us and went, "Oh, we forgot the reporting." And we're like, no problem. We're ahead of schedule, and let's look at what you got. Oh yeah, that's about $400. We're ahead of schedule, and we can still make the release date. No problem, don't worry about it. Well, then the next thing I know, her and two of the developers are going away, and we're like, oh, and we forgot this too. Oh, and by the way, we forgot that too. And oh, by the way, we forgot that too. And it was like, you know what? We're now looking at 750 hours, not 400 hours, and I'm gonna have to push the date out if we don't cut some of this scope. Can't cut any of the scope. So when I went to the customer and I said, hey, change control, man. I'm doing you guys a favor over here, change control. The feedback we got was, you're agile, and I trust the product owner. She's telling you what she needs. So we weren't doing very good at enforcing our change control. We broke our own change control rules, and it actually ended up biting us because then we weren't the good guys that came in and saved them anymore. We were the bad guys because we were going to be a week and a half late with the project. Okay, so scope management. So again, that's from the peer block. So again, we're talking about the whole project. We're talking about the project scope, not just the product scope. And the product scope kind of fits in the, okay? So I'm not going to go too much into this one. I'll just go, we do a lot of stakeholder management. Now, the business owner does a lot of stakeholder management, but the project manager really does. I mean, that's a primary function of the project manager. And one of the ways that we do it, and we stole this from the PMI, is we do a stakeholder register, which simply is a diagram that says, this is who's impacted by the project, and this is who can impact the project. And what's the dynamic between those two things? So it tells me, there may be somebody that's not very much impacted by the project, but they can really impact the project. I gotta make sure I go over and manage those people really well. They can really impact my project. But the Scrum Master does stakeholder management too. They just don't do it at the same level. They're not actually touching as many people as the project manager. Not that the Scrum Master, I mean, there are sometimes where the Scrum Master and the project manager are the same person. I actually am the Scrum Master for my core team, but I have 2 or 3 Scrum Masters that manage teams as well. So I do some Scrum Mastering, but I also do all the project management work for the other project managers. And what I find is that my team is just so self-actualized that they don't take a lot of management. As you can see, the project manager is responsible for both the product scope and the project scope, whereas the Scrum Master is really responsible for the project scope. And then again, we're both responsible for trade-offs. We make trade-offs. The work breakdown structure, something talked about earlier, and the user stories. For me as a project manager, the user stories are my work breakdown structure. And I found that for the first time as a project manager, I could really manage the work breakdown structure because it just lays it all out there for you. It's really beautiful. You don't have to go into the level, a finite level of detail. As the gentleman that was talking earlier, that if you stick to the features level, you're probably better off. We found we actually had a team that got into the extremely detailed user story number 2, add a field, user story number 3, and the text should be blah, blah, blah. And what we found was that we got so overwhelmed with noise, just raw data, that it became almost impossible to manage. So as you can see, there's a lot of overlap, but again, there's a place for project management, and there's it's a lot of stuff that it's difficult to do both of them really, really well. I know that I find I struggle with it when I'm doing both of them. So here's some things to see how your team is. If you have both, even if you have one, like there's in our team, anybody can stand up and be the Scrum Master. And anybody can run the stand-up. We use what we call a ship's log, which is just a book that people put the date on and scribble notes in, and anything major, they scribble it down. It's because we work in a regulated environment, and we also want to track decisions if they have to be made at the stand-up level. And again, use your stories for all units of scope. And either use your release plan for more than your product scope, or make it an appendix to your project management plan. If you're on a small project, again, you know, if it's a $150,000 project, maybe a 30-page rules of engagement document just isn't appropriate. It's, you know, what works in your context. Okay, so time management, I'm going to skip through this really quickly, this one, because we're actually running out of time. So for me, time management is part of the project management plan. And the project management plan just basically says, this is how we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to do that, and here's how we're going to manage our time, and here's how we're going to make decisions about trade-offs, and here's how we're going to do things together. Whereas the release plan says, this is what we're building. Okay? So you can see, we're still, again, we're forcing trade-offs. They're working in iterations. In a project management plan, we're really looking at critical dependencies between teams and between pieces of functionality. As an example, this summer, I don't know if any of you know this, I've heard about this in the news, but the lottery's main system went down for 32 days. That wasn't our platform. It was a platform we moved some of our player data onto, and they took over some of the player management functions from the platform that we had been building. And one of the critical path items, two of the critical path items actually, one of them was integrated testing between the systems, got chucked so that we could meet the political date. And another critical path item of load testing, performance testing got chucked, which is why the session swapping happened in load. So, you know, the PM is responsible for looking at all these big things and these critical path things that have to be in place and the dependencies between them. Whereas the Scrum Master is more focused on the dependencies within the team and the things that his team is just directly needs, or the things that people directly need from him. But if there's like 15 or 20 teams on a project, and he's not, he only cares about the stuff that's oh, I'm back to that. Okay. So again, you'll see this on everything. But one of the things, and I've had to do this with a few of my Scrum Masters, is go back, look at your velocity, and reevaluate the value of your story points. So if I say, if my team is doing I have a 5-person team, and they're doing a velocity of 10 story points a week, then I know that that story is basically, one story is worth half a person, right? I can make that really quick, half a person. But if I get a new team and they're only doing 5 story points a week, then I know that the estimates that I've been using on those stories is wrong, and I need to go back and reevaluate them. And that works. That's one of the great things I really love about the Agile estimating is it's order of magnitude estimating. So I can go in and just change all the values of all the stories without having to really go through and re-estimate them. I can just go through and say, well, you know, these guys were assuming that one story point was kind of this much work, but really one story point is kind of this much work, and I can do a broad brush change. I'm not going to go into this one. One of the bottom lines is if your team is doing Agile and they're doing it properly, they are giving you a good quality product, period. Because Agile is one of the best processes for quality that I've ever seen. I actually, and I know I heard quite a bit today, was like, don't be a taskmaster. Don't track things too much. I can't help it. I'm a metric person. I believe that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and so I actually do want to measure some things. And one of the things that we measure is our bug injection rate and our bug escape rate. And the bug injection rate tells me if my developers are doing their job and they are taking responsibility for the quality when it's the most cost-effective way to do it in the development, not in the testing, And my bug escape rate tells me if my testers are doing their job and finding all of the bugs that developers leave in there, and the bugs aren't escaping out into the verification process, into the validation process, so the verification validation. So the bug injection rate, Humphrey Watson, does anybody here know Humphrey Watson? Yes?
Yes.
Who is he?
He's part of the Software Engineering Institute.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. They call him the grandfather of the capability maturity model. And some years ago, he wrote a book called Personal Software Development Process. And he did a study of software developers, and what he found was the average bug injection rate was about a half hour of pure coding, 1 bug per half hour, on average. So of course I take that number, and I do weird stuff with it, and I go, okay, on average, I get about a half hour of pure coding to about every 2.5 project hours. And so I said, I'm looking at Humphrey Watts. I should expect 1 bug every 3 to 5 hours of my projects. And when I looked at it like that and I started measuring my bug injection rate, that was where I started. I said, okay, well, I should expect about 1 bug every 3 to 5 hours. And in fact, that is what we inherited. We were getting 1 bug every 4 hours was the project before my team came on the scene. Our first project was 1 bug every 16 hours. The company average is about 1 bug every 24 project hours. My team has a 1 bug every 55 project hours. So we've watched that number go up, go up, go up, go up, go up. And when the first time, it went from 1 bug every 4 hours to 1 bug every 15 hours when we introduced Agile methods. We were like, whoa, that's like a 700% increase in quality. Well, we're only going to see incremental increases off of this. We're never going to see that again. And then the next project, it was 20-something. And the next project, it was 30-something. And it just keeps going and going. And we're like, okay, where does it end? And it's quite amazing to see that the developers take this so seriously. Now, this bug injection rate metric that we share it and we celebrate it. So I don't know that it's always completely bad to be a little bit of a task master to actually measure some of the stuff. Okay, and then just some signs that you're doing quality methods. You don't really measure it and share it with your team, celebrate it with your team. I find that it's really, when teams really get in and they start doing Agile methods right, when they got their infrastructure right, they've got their automated testing in place, they're doing their unit testing. On our core product, we have a build that runs in under 10 minutes, purely on our unit testing is done purely in Ant, and it runs over 7,000 unit tests. Click of a button, and it tells me every build and every piece of functionality that's introduced and when it's introduced and how many tests passed on it, and it does it in under 10 minutes. So the daily build is no longer an issue. It's happening 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. So when they're doing it right and they start to get the stuff, quality is just there. Okay, so this one is one of my favorite topics because it goes to one of the Agile manifestos. It's a PMI thing that's totally aligned with the Agile manifesto, which is people before process. And so I think human resources management is a really important knowledge area that we can apply to our Agile processes. And that they fit together. So we look at some of the things. So one of the things from a project management perspective is you don't have to have an HR management plan. And I have to ensure that the team that's selected actually has this stuff, or I have some plan to make sure that they get this stuff. Right? And then as the Scrum Master, I'm always reminding the project manager, people before process. People before process is the most important thing. It's our people that make our projects. But the other interesting thing from the Scrum Master perspective is that they can really work with the team. And if you have a healthy team, they're all pretty open about it. And I'll just really quickly share with you here. This is a tool that my team uses. And what we do is we go through and we list, these are basically the skill sets of the team. and we go, at the beginning of our project, after we've done our basic high-level scoping, we go, okay, what is the stuff we need to know to do this? And then we'll go back and we'll review this and go, okay, let's review our skills and where we're at today compared to the last project. And we do it as a team, so nobody's ashamed. And sometimes people will go, and the last project, they'll go, oh, well, I thought I was a 3 at Fisheye, but really I realized I don't really know that much about it, and I'd like to put that back to a 1. And they do that naturally, and there is no concern about, you know, my skills aren't as great as so-and-so's or whatever, that they really work on it together. And so what we do is, by the way, this is supposed to be green here. So it gives us a sense of, okay, collectively, what's the training that we need to do, and who are we going to send, and who's going to volunteer? Because sometimes people don't really want to go to Iceland for a month and a half and leave their family. And we allocate the training that way, and we do this as a team effort. And by the way, also my performance review. We don't do it, that's our performance review. And when we add something to our list, we know that as a team we've grown. When an individual changes their skill, the individual has grown, but when we add something to the list, then we're growing as a team. So this, again, helps identify the training needs. See, to me, the PM is the guy that goes and does all this administrative stuff that, you know, helps find the cheapest training, make sure that the travel coordinator's got everything booked for them, and the Scrum Master's really focusing on the product delivery. Again, when we're talking about the HR thing, the project manager is really supporting the Scrum Master. So, how do we know if the skills needed or no? Again, what I was saying earlier, when our list expands, we know our team competency is expanding, and when individuals expand, individuals grow. And actually, one of the things that came up was estimating. How good am I at estimating story points? How accurate are we? And the team decided the last project that they were actually very good at estimating. So I think it's good for them. Then communications management. The reason I put this up here is because I find that this happens. Remember that game Telephony? You know, where I write something on a piece of paper, and then I go over here and I whisper it into her ear, and she whispers it into yours, and it goes down the path. Isn't that the reality of projects? There's so much swirl around stuff. And the more complicated it gets, the more swirl there is. And the more people are involved, the more complicated it gets. And actually, there's a formula, and it goes team minus 1 times team divided by 2. And what that means is, this is the number of people that are involved in the project. Execute this formula, and that is how many communications channels you need to manage. So imagine when this gets up to 25, what that means. So it really is important to sit down and go, how are we going to manage all these communication channels, and actually think through that process and write down what that rule of engagement, what that protocol could be. I think that's the right formula. So when I look at communications, one of the things actually that I love about Agile is that it solves a lot of communication issues, because there's so much direct face-to-face communication going on that it resolves a lot of the complex issues when it's a document-based process and you have all of those channels. It's so faster. That's for the and I think that for you folks, this is a really important piece for your life. How am I doing? I'm going over?
You're out.
I'm out?
That's it.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. We started late, so I'll just, I just want to go really quickly with the risk management. And the reason that I want to go with risk management, I'm sorry, but is that I think it's one of the least understood and most important pieces. So at the Agile level, we really manage risk at the task level, at the user story level. but at the project management level, you look at it in a much bigger context. And back to that, get your finances, understand your finances. If you can cost out your risks on an individual basis, actually put a cost to them, and put them in your budget when you put it in front of your customer, I guarantee your outage and your going over cost on your budgets, your project budgets, will be cut in half at least. Because a lot of our cost overhead comes from the risks that we didn't